Hey guys, this is George from Invensis Learning, and I welcome you to our YouTube channel. In today's session, we will understand risk management in detail. Before we start, let us quickly go through the agenda. We will understand why we need risk management and project planning. We will also understand what risk management is and its role in project management. Next, we will discuss various success factors for risk management, and discuss the various project risk management processes. A brief understanding of what risk mitigation is, then we will discuss the top risk mitigation strategies with examples and understand how to create a risk mitigation plan. Finally, we will discuss best practices in risk mitigation and discuss some of the widely used risk mitigation tools. If you like this video, do subscribe to our YouTube channel also. To learn more about project management and its practices, check out Invensis Learning's Project Management Certification Training on PMP, Prince2 Foundation, and Practitioner Project Management Fundamentals. All of the necessary information is given in the description box below. Now let's get started with the first topic of today's session. Why do we need to manage risks? Various projects, organizations, and situations will require different approaches to project risk management. In particular, risk management is a discipline that contains a series of processes to apply to large and small projects. Therefore, risk management will be effective if its practice is tailored to the project and congruent with the organizational culture, processes, and assets. So what does effective risk management allow you to do? It helps identify your project strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. If you prepare for unexpected events to occur beforehand, you can take the necessary action accordingly. If you want to ensure your project's success, it is important to handle potential risks and ensure your project's success defines how you will handle potential risks. Project managers can be successful if they prioritize risk management. Achieving a project's goals depends on various factors such as planning, preparation results, and evaluation that contribute to achieving strategic goals. Knowing why we need to manage risks lets us understand what risk management is in detail. If we have to define project risk management includes the processes concerned with conducting risk management, planning, identification, analysis, responses, and monitoring and control of a project. The main objective of risk management is to create a positive impact on events. In summary, project risk management aims to identify and prioritize risks in advance of their occurrence and provide action-oriented information to project managers and other important people involved in it. This situation requires possible events that may or may not occur and are therefore described in the probability of occurrence. Now, let us understand the role of risk management in project management. Many of us must be wondering if risk management is an optional activity. It is not. Risk management should be applied to all projects, and this is why it must be included in every stage of project plans and documentation. This way, it can become an integral part of project management. Many of the project management processes address and work on planning the project's design and attaining goods or services through daily management of execution. Unfortunately, these processes often assume an unrealistic degree of certainty about the project. Therefore, they need to include treatment of project risks. This is where risk management comes into the picture. It addresses the uncertainty in project estimates and assumptions, therefore, it builds upon and extends other project management processes. For example, a project schedule provides dates and critical paths based on activity durations and resource availability assumed to be known with certainty. The solution to possible risks in quantitative risk analysis. It understands the uncertainty in the estimated issue and can provide alternative paths that are more doable given the project's risks. It must be clear that project risk management is separate from other project management processes. Instead, it requires that these project management processes, such as scheduling, budgeting, change, management, etc., be performed at the level of the best practices available. Risk management adds the perspective of project risk to the outputs of those other processes and adds to their value by taking risk into account. For example, risk management provides the basis for estimating the cost and scheduling contingency reserves needed to cover risk response actions to a required level of confidence for meeting project objectives. In some situations, There is a paradox about project risk that affects projects in the initial stages of a project. Risk exposure is at its maximum, but information on the project risks is minimal. This scenario does not mean that a project should not go forward because little is known at that time. Rather, there may be various ways of approaching the project with other risk implications. The more this situation is analyzed, the more practical the project plan's results will be. Therefore, we must ensure that a risk management approach is applied throughout a project's life cycle. The earlier in the project life cycle that the risks are recognized, the more realistic the project plans and expectations of results will be. Risk management continues to add value as project planning progresses and more information becomes available about all aspects and components of the project and its environments, such as stakeholders, scope, time cost, and corresponding assumptions and constraints. Therefore, the balance between project flexibility and knowledge about project risk needs to be reviewed regularly and optimized as the plans develop. During project execution, risk management processes monitor the changes the project undergoes for new risks that may emerge so that appropriate responses can be developed and check for existing risks that are no longer plausible. Project risk management plays a role in providing realistic expectations for the completion dates and cost of the project, even if there are a few options for changing the future. Finally, closure risk-related lessons are reviewed throughout the project and during the project to contribute to organizational learning and support continuous improvement of project risk management practice. These practices can then be applied to other relatable or upcoming projects. Let us now discuss the 6 factors that determine the success of risk management. Firstly, it is important to recognize the value of risk management. It should be recognized as an extremely valuable discipline that provides a positive potential return on investment for organizational management, internal and external project stakeholders, team members, and project management. The next factor is individual commitment or responsibility. Here, project participants and stakeholders should fully accept responsibility for undertaking risk-related activities whenever required. Risk management is not one person's responsibility. There must also be open and honest communication. Everyone in the team should be able to discuss the project risk management process or issues that hinder communication about project risk and reduce the effectiveness of project risk management in several terms, such as proactive approaches and effective decision-making. Also, organizational commitment is another important factor in determining the success of risk management. This can be established if risk management is aligned with the organization's goal. Project risk management may sometimes be supported only by upper management rather than other project management disciplines because some risks will require undivided attention. We also have a risk effort scale to project various activities of project risk management that should align with the value of the project to the organization. In short, the cost of project risk management should be appropriate to its potential value to the project in the organization. Finally, we have integration with project management. It is important to realize that project risk management is not separate or isolated from other processes. Successful project risk management requires the correct execution of other project management processes. Let's move to the next part of today's session and talk about the various project risk management processes. The first process that we have on the list today is plan risk management. The main objective of the plan risk management process is to develop the overall risk management strategy. Here you will decide how the processes will be executed and integrate them with all other project management activities. Effective risk management requires the creation of a risk management plan. This plan describes how the risk management processes should be executed and how they fit in with the other processes on a broader level. It describes the relationships among project risk management, general project management and the organization's management processes to provide the best benefit. Initial risk management planning should be carried out early in the project's overall planning also. It is important that the risk management activities must be integrated into the overall project management plan. The risk management plan may need to be adapted as the needs of the project and stakeholders change or become clear over time. To ensure your project's success, it is important to define how you will handle risk to identify, mitigate or avoid problems when required. There are 2 main categories of success criteria for risk management. The first category is for those who want to see their project succeed in general. and the second is for those who want to succeed in their project risk management. We will discuss each of these categories in detail. The first one is called project-related criteria. To assess the success of project risk management, the stakeholders must agree on an acceptable level of results of the project-related criteria such as cost, time, and scope. To achieve this consistency among stakeholders, the risk management plan must present objectives regarding the project definition and documents to guide risk management. In prioritizing risk responses, stakeholders should also prioritize each project objective. Next, we have process-related criteria. We have already discussed several factors that measure success in project risk management. For example, a research project's risk management process needs to address more unforeseen changes than a project with a more predictable environment. Therefore, our research project risk management process may be considered a success even if it results in more variance from the baseline than would be allowable for a successful process in a more predictable project. Now let's move ahead and discuss the various tools and techniques for the plan risk management process. The first technique is to plan sessions. It is recommended to build a mutual understanding of the project's risk approach to stakeholders and gain agreement on the techniques to manage risk. Suppose we elaborate on the risk management plan. In that case, it will develop an effective means for the team to work together, and a similar approach will be used in the upcoming stages of the risk management process. The participants must include the project manager, at least a few project team members, and other stakeholders, and the broader project team members responsible for initial risk responsibilities, methodology templates, definitions, timelines, and costs for the other project. Risk management processes should be selected, and accepted tools that are used in upcoming processes will include all resources to ensure their applicability to the project. All the information must be documented in the risk management plan, and when it is approved it will be the principal deliverable of this process. For the next tool we have templates to benefit from the existing practices. Risk management planning should consider relevant templates or resources like risk status reports, risk breakdown structures, or the risk register. Project managers should decide as to which resources are relevant to the project. These resources should then be adapted and included in the risk management plan. In the next part of today's session, we will discuss documenting the plan risk management process results. The results of risk management planning are documented in the risk management plan itself. Now let us understand what the plan serves to do. It provides all project stakeholders with an agreeable view of how the risk-related activities of the project will be handled and what has been agreed upon, and a description of the stakeholders' involvement and the various responsibilities in each of these activities. The key areas of focus are given on the screen depending upon the project elements like introduction, project description, risk management methodology, risk management, organization criteria for success, templates, communications, plan, stakeholder risk tolerance, etc. can be present in a risk management plan. Now let's move on to the second risk management process. Firstly, let us take a look at its objectives. The main reason for risk identification is to identify risks to the maximum implementation extent. Some risks are unknowable. They require the identity risk process to be iterative, so you can repeat the identification risk process to find new risks that can occur over time. This process should be recorded and considered for appropriate action where such responses are not implemented immediately. These should be considered during the plan risk responses process. A vast number of tools and techniques are available for risk identification. These fall into the following three categories: past, present, and future. Firstly, we have historical reviews. They are based on what occurred in the past, either in this project, similar projects in the same company, or similar projects in other companies. Historical review approaches depend on selecting similar situations to the current project. You can filter data accordingly to ensure that only relevant previous risks are considered. Secondly, we have current assessments that rely on detailed consideration of the current project and analyze its characteristics against given models to expose areas of uncertainty. Current assessment techniques do not depend on outside information but are based purely on the examination of the project. Finally, we have creativity techniques. A copious range of creative techniques can be used for risk identification, encouraging project stakeholders to use their imagination and experience to find risks that might affect the project. The outcomes of these techniques depend on the ability of participants to think creatively or out of the box. The techniques used can either be single or in groups and also employ varying degrees of structure. Again, they mainly depend on the ability of participants to think creatively, and their success is enhanced by the use of a skilled facilitator. Now we will discuss documenting the results of the Identify Risks process. It is important to record the identified risk process results to capture all relevant information currently available for each identified risk. The only output from the Identify Risks process is the risk register. So, what is the risk register? It includes a properly structured risk description and the nominated risk owner for each risk. It may also include information on the causes and effects of the risk trigger conditions and preliminary responses. The next process is perform qualitative risk analysis. This process assesses and evaluates characteristics of individually identified project risks and prioritizes risks based on agreed upon characteristics. If we assess risks individually, using qualitative risk analysis, there are two advantages. Firstly, we will evaluate the probability of each risk that can occur. Secondly, we will also evaluate the effects of each risk on the project and its goals, but it does not address the combined effect of all the risks to the project. On the other hand, the tools and techniques that assess individual risks will focus or identify the ones that will directly have a huge negative impact on the project. To begin with, you have to select risk characteristics that define risk importance. These tools provide a way to recognize risks that are important for analysis from those that are less important. Output from such tools can be a listing of risks according to their priority order. In the next step, we have to collect data and analyze it. Individual risks that are to be assessed are based on information collected. Therefore, data collection and evaluation tools including interviews, workshops and references to databases of prior projects that require management support and attention. In addition, it is important to protect against bias and data gathering, which is important when relying on expert judgment. Then we have to prioritize risk by probability and impact on specific objectives. Some tools allow distinguishing a risk priority in terms of the affected goals of the project. This specification will provide a list of risks that are important for any specific objective that requires immediate attention. This is useful since it is common for risks to have uneven impacts on various project objectives. We will have to prioritize risks by probability and impact on the overall project. There are several reasons for measuring a specific risk's importance to the entire project as contrasted with its importance to specific objectives. A common reason is for ease of communication with management and other stakeholders. When a single risk prioritization index is needed, the organization should be explicit about how that index is created. Usually the index reflects the organization's preference among objectives. The method used to create the risk priority measure should be well documented in the planned risk management process. In the next step, categorize risk causes. Categorizing risks may lead to improved analysis of the probability and magnitude of project risk, and effective responses. Do not neglect the relationships between risks. It may provide a better understanding of the possibility and magnitude of project risk than if risks are only considered separate and independent events. If we can identify the common causes of a set of risks, it may reveal the magnitude of the risk event for that particular group and strategies that might address many risks. Alternatively, some risks may be linked with others in a causal chain, and understanding the chain of risks may lead to a better understanding of the risk implication for the project. It is safer to identify risks that can occur at a certain time, where using resources might also provide a realistic picture of the current scenario. Finally, we have to document the results of the qualitative risk analysis process. This process adds a basic structure to a list of undifferentiated risks in terms of priority. In short, each risk laid out is assigned a priority either by objective or for the entire project. All of this information will be stored within a risk register which is updated regularly. The risk register obtains this list of prioritized risks, which is presented to the project manager or other people that are involved in the project to prepare solutions. Risks that are highly prioritized are segregated for further analysis and response planning and are monitored frequently. On the other hand, risks of low priority may be placed on a watch list and reviewed less often for any change. The next process is to perform quantitative risk analysis. This process provides a numerical estimate of the overall effective risk on the project's objectives based on current plans. Results from this analysis can be used to evaluate the chances of success in achieving project objectives. Also, you can estimate contingency reserves, usually for time and cost appropriate to project stakeholders' risks and risk tolerance. Estimating overall project risk using quantitative methods helps distinguish those projects where quantified risks threaten objectives beyond the stakeholders' tolerance from those for which the objectives are acceptable. Even when risk is considered, the former may be targeted for vigorous risk responses to protect the most important objectives of the stakeholders. Now let us talk about the tools and techniques for performing quantitative risk analysis. Although tools and techniques used appropriately for quantitative risk analysis have several characteristics, we will discuss each in detail. Firstly, we have comprehensive risk representation. Risk models permit the representation of most of the risks that have an impact on an objective simultaneously. They also represent opportunities and threats to the project's objectives. The second characteristic is risk impact calculation. Quantitative models facilitate the calculation of the effective risks, which are identified and quantified at a level of detail below the total project that is on the project objectives. The third characteristic is the quantitative method appropriate for analyzing uncertainty. For instance, probability models use a quantitative method that addresses uncertainty specifically. The method should handle how uncertainty is also represented. We have data gathering tools. These tools used in this process include assessment of historical data and workshops, interviews, or questionnaires to gather quantified information, for instance, on the probability of a risk occurring, a probability distribution of its potential impacts on resources such as cost or time, and even relationships such as the correlation between risks. There must also be an effective presentation of quantitative analysis. Results from the quantitative tools are usually not obtainable in standard deterministic project management methods. The next characteristic is quantitative risk analysis. The success of the process is improved if used regularly throughout the project. It is impossible to know all the risks that may occur in a project beforehand, therefore, quantitative risk analysis should often be repeated as the project proceeds. The frequency of this effort will be determined during the plan risk management process, but it will also depend on events that occur within the project. The last characteristic is information for response planning. The project contingency reserve should be reflected in the project schedule and budget, and this is where quantitative risk analysis comes to the rescue. It provides information that may be used to modify the project plan if the overall risk to time and cost indicates that a scope adjustment is needed. The scope changes are agreed upon and documented. A new quantitative risk analysis is carried out to reflect the new aspects of the project. Let us now talk about documenting the results of the quantitative risk analysis process. The contingency reserves calculated are incorporated into the cost estimate and schedule to establish a target and realistic project expectations. Contingency reserves may also be established to capture opportunities that are judged to be priorities for the project. There can be situations where the contingency reserve required exceeds the time or resources, and there may be changes in the scope and planning of the project itself. Also, the analysis results provide more or less urgency to risk response depending on the probability of achieving the plan's objectives or the contingency reserve required to provide the necessary confidence level. Finally, the quantitative risk analysis results are recorded and can then be passed to the people responsible for managing the project for any further actions required of these results. In the next process, we have to plan risk responses. This determines effective response actions that are appropriate to the priority of the individual risks and the overall project risk. It takes into consideration the stakeholders' risk attitudes and the conventions specified in the risk management plan, along with any constraints and assumptions that were determined when the risks were identified and analyzed. Let us talk about the objectives of the plan risk responses process. You can determine the set of actions that enhance the chances of project success with project constraints. Once risks have been identified, plans should be developed to address every risk the project team considers essential. The planning involves agreeing upon the actions to be taken and the potential changes to elements like the budget, schedule, resources, and scope, which these actions might cause. There are 4 different tools and techniques for the plan risk responses process. We have created tools to identify potential responses, decision support tools for determining the optimal potential response, strategy implementation techniques, and tools to transfer control to the monitor and control risks process. These tools can identify potential responses, select the most appropriate response, translate strategy into planning, and assign the corresponding actions. Let's talk about documenting the results of the plan risk responses process. Risk response planning is based on the information placed in the risk register. You can add risk responses to the risk register. Each risk response related information is recorded and regularly updated in the risk register. Any stakeholder should be able to access any information to manage their responsibilities and risks. Under the risk response plan, residual risks and their priorities are identified and recorded. You can also add corresponding risk responses to the project management plan. While developing a set of risk responses, the project-related implications are evaluated for inclusion in a modified project management plan. These include costs, resource assignments, scheduling details, and changes to project documentation. These changes must be formally approved before the additional risks that they may carry risk response planning can be considered complete. It is also important to review and document predicted exposure once the risk responses have been defined and integrated into the project management plan. Finally, the individual and overall residual risks related to this plan are evaluated to determine whether additional response planning is required. This evaluation should estimate both the common post-response situation and the potential improvement of the risk exposure, assuming that the proposed responses are effective. In short, all of the evaluations should be documented. The last process is to monitor and control risks. The effectiveness of project risk management depends upon the way the approved plans are carried out. Plans should be executed correctly, reviewed, and updated regularly. If this procedure is carried out in an orderly fashion, the invested effort will be rewarded, and future projects will benefit from this project's experience. Let us talk about the primary objectives of risk monitoring and controlling. Firstly, it is important to track pre-evaluated risks, monitor residual risks, and identify new risks. Also, you must ensure that risk response plans are executed appropriately and evaluate their effectiveness throughout the project life cycle. In addition to tracking and managing the risk response actions, the effectiveness of all of the project risk management processes should be reviewed to improve the management of the current project, and future risk monitoring and controlling require a set of tools that will support its success factors for tracking all kinds of risks. Secondly, we have to manage contingency reserves that may be allocated to cover time and cost-related risks, techniques that allow the project manager to assess the project at any time required for the project's success. Moving on, you can track trigger conditions and their metrics defined during the plan risk response process. Various tools and techniques are required to evaluate and track conditions against the project threshold. Tools can provide information on risks related to the deliverables, such as performance, and project-related features, such as time and cost. We will also require tools to determine the progress of the project. Certain tools check if necessary actions have the expected effect on the project's overall level of risk. Finally, we have tracking compliance to monitor the quality of the execution of the risk-related plans. A set of quality metrics should be recorded. These metrics will be formally defined in the risk management plan. Now, let us talk about documenting the results of the monitor and control risks process. The final action of risk monitoring and controlling is to record present data for future use. This includes information relating to risk management from beginning to end of the project. The goal is to ensure that the risk management information is recorded to provide appropriate data. Risk mitigation. Now, we will understand everything about risk mitigation and its strategies. Things that are inevitable in a project are risks. There are risks involved with the project's processes when a production team begins a new project, and even an ongoing project. Some risks can be predictable while others can arise at any phase of the project. However, some measures can help limit these risks and predict their consequences. These procedures are useful for identifying, assessing, evaluating, and monitoring risks and their associated effects. Our first topic is: what is risk mitigation? Risk mitigation involves planning and creating strategies and solutions to minimize threats to project goals or risks. A project team can adopt risk mitigation measures to identify, monitor, and analyze risks and the effects of a particular project, such as developing a new product. In addition to addressing issues and their impact on a project, risk mitigation also includes the implementation of countermeasures. This was just a brief introduction to risk mitigation. Now let us move on to our next topic and discuss the top risk mitigation strategies with examples. Appropriate risk mitigation involves determining potential risks to a project, such as a team revenue, product failure, and scope creep, and then implementing strategies to reduce or eliminate the risk. Here in risk mitigation planning and monitoring, the following methods can be used. First, accept and assume the risk. The acceptance strategy might include cooperation among the team members to determine the project's potential risks and if the resulting consequences are acceptable. In addition to recognizing risks and their associated effects, team members can also identify and assume the risk's potential weaknesses. This method is widely used to identify and understand the risks that can impact the output of a project. Its objective is to bring these risks to the company's attention so that everyone working on the project has a shared awareness of the risks and their consequences. The following examples illustrate how the acceptance strategy might be applied to frequently recognized risks. The accept technique, the first cost impacting risk, can detect cost affecting risks. For instance, a project team can use the accept method to identify risks to the project budget and develop measures to reduce the risk of going over budget so that all team members are aware of the risk and its potential implications. Second is schedule impacting risks. The accept technique might aid in identifying potential scheduling risks, such as maintaining the project on schedule to reach the deadlines. Third is risks affecting performance. These sorts of risks might involve performance concerns such as team productivity or product performance, such as software or manufactured items, and can be recognized and acknowledged as part of the project planning process so that all members are aware of possible performance risks. The second risk mitigation strategy is avoidance of risk. The avoidance strategy shows the accepted and expected risks and effects of a project and the chances of avoiding such risks. Some techniques for executing the avoidance strategy include planning for risk and then taking precautions to prevent it. For instance, a project team can opt to perform product testing to eliminate the danger of product failure before the final production. Here are some other examples where avoidance strategies can be used. First is the risk to schedule. By recognizing potential concerns that might impact the project's timing, it is possible to avoid schedule impacts. For example, important deadlines, due dates, and final delivery dates can be impacted by risks such as being too optimistic about a project's duration. The avoidance method can help the project team prepare strategies to prevent schedule conflicts, such as by generating a controlled schedule that shows exact time allocations for planning, design testing, and retesting, as well as making any required adjustments to prevent time management risks. It is also possible to schedule non-working hours. The second is the risk to cost. Avoiding cost difficulties is another use of this method. For instance, a project team can outline all anticipated costs and account for any costs that can arise to avoid the consequences of going over budget. The third is a potential performance risk resulting from mitigating performance risks such as insufficient resources to do the preliminary task design and bad team dynamics. A project team can find potential strategies to prevent risk situations resulting in performance concerns. Next, a production team can test more durable product materials to avoid the risk of product failure with less durable materials. Similarly, if there is a performance risk within the dynamics of the project team, interactive team management can be employed to prevent team difficulties. The third risk mitigation strategy is controlling risk. Team members can also implement a control strategy when mitigating risks to a project. This method works by taking into consideration risks recognized and acknowledged and then taking actions to mitigate or eliminate the consequences of these risks. Some examples that demonstrate how control measures can be used for risk mitigation are: first, controlling the risk of schedule. Diversifying tasks and the time required to perform them across the project team allows for managing scheduling effects. Control techniques These can include keeping track of the time required to accomplish each job and allocating particular tasks to team members based on the time required to complete each activity. The project team could also consider time management measures to reduce any risk to the project schedule better. Second is controlling performance. Risk implementing control techniques for performance risk might involve means of guiding a team's daily work, quality control methods for new products, and measures for taking action to control problems that could influence the overall performance of a projected. Third is controlling risks to cost. A project team can use control systems that might identify potential budget issues. For instance, controls for risk mitigation can include a focus on management, the decision-making process, or identifying issues in the project's funding before problems arise, can also provide insight into how money is being allocated and if there is a danger of going over budget. Then, the team can detect it in advance and take actions to limit it, such as lowering expenditure or deleting a resource that might be too expensive for the project. The fourth risk mitigation strategy is risk transference. When risks are acknowledged and considered, transference could be a suitable technique for limiting their effects. The transference approach is effective because it transfers the burden of risk and consequences to another party. However, this can have its disadvantages, and when an organization uses this risk reduction method, this must do so in a manner that is acceptable to all stakeholders. The example that follows shows how and when risk reduction strategies use transference. First is performance transference. If, for example, a manufacturing team has created a new product, but it is false, and the product is defective, the faults cannot be due solely to manufacturing concerns but rather to problems with materials obtained from an external source, or the company can pass the consequences to the outside vendor responsible for delivering the product materials by demanding the vendor to cover the expenses associated with product faults. Second is scheduling transference. While this is a risk in and of itself, transfer strategies can be utilized to place the weight of falling behind schedule on the team members responsible for time management rather than on the company as a whole, with the consequences passed to the team members responsible for scheduling. The production team, design team, or other teams can concentrate on finishing their remaining tasks. Third is the transfer for cost accountants. Financial advisors can be held responsible for budgeting errors as part of the transfer of cost-related risks. For instance, a project that exceeds its budget can result in increased manufacturing costs and financing for supplies if the repercussions are pushed to the finance teams responsible for budget monitoring. Production managers and team members can concentrate on their jobs while the finance team addresses cost issues. The fifth risk mitigation strategy is monitor and observe. Risk monitoring projects for risks and consequences includes keeping an eye out for and recognizing any modifications that might modify the risk's effect. This method might be part of the production team's typical project review plan. For example, cost, schedule, and performance or productivity are all project factors that can be monitored for potential risks that might arise throughout its execution. The following example shows methods for monitoring and evaluating risks and their potential impacts on the execution of a project. The first is monitoring costs. A finance team or budget committee can examine and manage cost concerns by establishing a reporting routine that details each company's spending. This technique is effective because it enables teams to evaluate the budget and adjust cost plans appropriately and regularly. The second is the monitoring schedule. Monitoring project schedules might involve weekly evaluations of each team member's tasks and the time required to fulfill each task. The team can then review and monitor any concerns that might affect the project's timeline. Software such as calendars and project management applications can aid in the monitoring and evaluation of time management and project scheduling. Third is monitoring performance. Monitoring the performance of a project, products, team members, and resources are examples of how performance monitoring can be implemented. Evaluating and measuring many parts of a company's performance helps limit weakening risks. Technologies such as productivity software can aid in tracking and evaluating performance processes inside the project. The performance of employees can be monitored through the design and implementation of regular performance reviews, and the performance of products can be monitored through continuous product testing and review. This was about the top risk mitigation strategies with examples. Now let us move on to our next topic and discuss creating a risk mitigation plan. A few steps are generally standard when building a risk mitigation strategy. For most companies, recognizing recurrent threats, prioritizing risk mitigation, and monitoring the set plan are essential components of a complete risk mitigation approach. Here are 5 basic stages involved in the formulation of a risk management plan. First, identify all potential risk-presenting scenarios. A risk mitigation plan takes into consideration not only the goals and mission-critical data security of each company but also any risks that can develop due to the nature of the field or geographic location. A risk mitigation plan must also include the demands of an organization's employees. Second, perform a risk assessment, which includes evaluating the potential risks involved in a projected activity. Risk assessments include procedures, processes, and controls for mitigating the risk's effect. Third, prioritize risks, which includes assessing measurable risks by severity. Prioritization is a component of risk mitigation that involves accepting a certain degree of risk in one area of the company to protect another better. By setting an acceptable amount of risk for various areas, a company can better prepare the necessary resources for business continuity while delaying fewer mission-critical business processes. Fourth is tracking risks. It involves monitoring risks as their severity or importance to the company changes. It is essential to have strong metrics for monitoring the risk's evolution and the plan's capacity to fulfill compliance requirements. Fifth is to implement and monitor progress, which includes re-evaluating the plan's ability to detect risk and modifying it as necessary in business continuity planning. Plan testing is essential to risk mitigation. Once a strategy is in place, it should undergo frequent testing and analysis to ensure that it is up to date and performing properly. Risks confronting data centers are constantly evolving, therefore, risk mitigation strategies must account for any shifts in risk and altering priorities. So this is how you can create a risk mitigation plan. Now let us move on to our next topic and talk about the best risk mitigation practices. In this section, we are going to talk about some of the recommended practices for risk reduction that information security professionals should follow too. First, ensure that stakeholders are engaged in each phase. Employees, management unions, shareholders, and customers are examples of stakeholders in the development of a complete holistic risk mitigation plan. All views are important. Second, creating a robust risk management culture requires conveying the values, attitudes, and beliefs around risk from the top down, and compliance risk awareness is essential for every employee. Still, the likelihood of a strong culture is significantly increased when management sets the tone. It is essential to create an environment in which team members feel at ease raising concerns to upper management without fear. You should escalate one problem at a time to a single stakeholder. You should only include stakeholders that are affected by the issue when escalating concerns. One should assess the problem's severity, provide contextual information, and recommend remedial methods. Next, communicate risks as they emerge. Risk awareness must be high across the whole business, thus, it is essential to keep everyone informed by enabling communication of new high-impact risks. Next, ensure that the risk management policy is understandable so that workers can commit to its roles and duties should be well-defined, and each identified risk requires a well-defined procedure for handling it. Next, continuously monitor potential dangers to enhance the risk mitigation strategy, and risk monitoring methods should also be properly established and applied. The next best practice to adopt improved planning criteria for technical work time is crucial for every project, and planning can help you manage time throughout the project. In addition, better scheduling and estimates will assist the risk manager in increasing their success rate when dealing with technical tasks in particular. Define and evaluate quality criteria throughout the life cycle of the project. In creative projects, the quality level of a project is of utmost importance in each step of a project's life cycle. Standards and criteria must be defined to ensure quality throughout the project life cycle. A project manager should clearly understand what constitutes quality based on the criteria acceptable to every stakeholder, particularly those on both sides who must sign off on the final deliverables. The following are ways to do so. First, separate the project into several stages. The second is to establish objective quality measuring standards. The third is to document and communicate the procedures with all parties involved. Fourth is established quality standards upon which all stakeholders can agree. The fifth is to support statements with data. Lastly, forming an emergency response team is another effective practice for project risk management. Occasionally, a stakeholder can withdraw funds failing a crucial technological component. Therefore, the risk management team should consist of experienced people with broad access to project planning and risk management. When errors occur, the team should have the necessary experience and training to rescue the project. Essentially, your risk response team should prepare contingency plans for the worst-case scenarios. So, these were some of the risk mitigation best practices. Now let us move on to our final topic for today and talk about the risk mitigation tools. One of the tools is the risk assessment framework. A risk assessment framework is a regularly used risk reduction strategy. An RAF offers an organization a summary of which systems provide high or low risk and information for both technical and non-technical staff by offering standardized risk assessment and reporting methodologies. An RAF can be used as a risk reduction instrument and other typical risk mitigating methods. Risk mitigating methods include a probability and impact matrix. The probability and impact matrix is a secondary tool for project managers. It helps prioritize risk, which is crucial since you don't want to spend time and resources addressing a small risk. This method rates individual risks according to their severity by combining their likelihood and effect values. Thus, each risk is recognized in the context of the whole project, and a strategy is in place to respond if it occurs. Next tool is SWOT analysis. A SWOT analysis is a framework for identifying and assessing an organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. These terms include the acronym SWOT. The fundamental objective of SWOT analysis is to raise awareness of the factors influencing company decisions and formulating corporate strategies. To do this, the SWOT analysis evaluates the internal and external environment as well as the elements that might influence the viability of choosing an entity. Should conduct a SWOT analysis to get insight into its existing and future position in the market or reference to a stated objective. Using this study, organization or individuals can identify competitive advantages, positive prospects, and current and future difficulties. With this knowledge, they can formulate business strategies or personal or organizational objectives to capitalize on strengths and address weaknesses. The next tool, a root cause analysis or RCA, is a technique for determining the underlying reason for a seen or experienced occurrence. An RCA focuses on the causal components of the incident's why, how, and when. Typically, a business will undertake a root cause analysis or RCA to identify the root cause of an issue and prevent it from occurring again. When a system fails or changes, investigators should do a root cause analysis to understand the occurrence and its causes thoroughly. Beyond problem solving, which is corrective action conducted when an event happens. Root cause analysis is the next stage. In contrast, an RCA identifies the fundamental cause of a problem and RCA analyzes all contributing variables to a problem, linking events in a meaningful manner so that the issue can be effectively treated and avoided from repeating. It is only possible to figure out how, when, and why an issue originated if one identifies the problem source rather than concentrating on its symptoms. In addition to having a thorough awareness of internal requirements and resources, external expertise can be a valuable addition to a risk mitigation strategy. Several business continuities and disaster recovery providers or data recovery focus on risk reduction. Even smaller enterprises can use data recovery as a service vendor to keep costs relatively low. I would like to conclude the session by saying avoid, accept, reduce, control or transfer. Businesses will be required to address each and every risk they come across. A little planning and effort provide more possibilities than a product recall or bankruptcy filing. Within the risk management framework of your organization, there should be both knowledge of the different techniques and an understanding of their execution standards. Everyday engineers and management across the business make risk-related choices. Providing a set of clear strategies together with direction enables the whole organization to manage risks every day in an appropriate manner. With this, we have reached the end of today's session on what is risk management. If this has spiked your interest and you want to know more about project management, opt for PMP certification training and clear the exam at Invensis Learning. We provide various PMP certifications that will pave the way for your career and project management. We are accredited by respective governing bodies or courses in line with their guidelines for each of these certifications. You will get lifetime access to a personalized learning management system after enrollment. LMS has all the class recordings, live class webinar links, assignments, and case studies to practice. All classes are live instructor-led and delivered by trainers with rich domain experience. Thank you, guys. We will see you in the next session.